Ethan had never imagined that a routine mission would lead to something so strange. He had been sent to a distant planet, one that was far from the known galaxy, to make contact with an alien race. Humans had been traveling through space for some time now, but their reputation had not yet spread across the stars. Most species still saw humans as weak and unimportant, a species with little to offer. But Ethan's mission was to change that perception. He didn't know how, but he hoped this mission would be different. The planet was covered in forests and rolling hills, a perfect world with a peaceful sky and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. When Ethan landed, the first thing he noticed was the people waiting for him. They were taller than humans. Their skin was a deep shade of violet, and their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the planet's two suns. They looked like warriors, but there was something different about them. They didn't seem hostile. They seemed curious. The leader of this alien group, a woman named Lyra, welcomed Ethan with open arms. Her people, known as the Veron, had a reputation across the galaxy as fierce warriors. They fought in battles that left entire armies trembling in fear. However, they weren't just known for their fighting skills, they also held a deep respect for culture and art. Lyra explained that her people were looking for a way to connect with the human race. They wanted to learn about humanity's traditions, beliefs, and strengths. Ethan was intrigued. He hadn't expected such a warm welcome. He was used to dealing with more aggressive species, but the Veron were different. There was an air of respect and curiosity about them, not aggression. He followed Lyra through the village, where the air smelled like freshly baked bread and spices. The Veron weren't just warriors. They were also known for their unique skill in baking weapons. Their pastries were beautiful, but underneath the sweet layers they hid blades, arrows, and other sharp objects designed for battle. As Ethan walked through the village, he was introduced to the Veron's customs. The elders taught him about their history, about how they had risen from a small tribe to a powerful force in the galaxy. Despite their military prowess, they valued peace and understanding with other species. Ethan admired their strength, but he also saw the vulnerability in them, especially when it came to their families. After spending the day getting to know their ways, Ethan was invited to a feast that night. The Veron's finest warriors, their leaders and their families gathered around a large stone table filled with strange foods. The meal was both delicious and strange, with flavors Ethan had never experienced before. At the head of the table was Cirrus, Lyra's mother. She was a tall woman, even by Veron standards, with strong arms and a stern face. But there was something kind about her eyes. Her reputation as both a skilled warrior and a master baker made her a respected figure in their society. Ethan was still getting used to the way the Veron people spoke. Their language was strange, but he had learned enough to understand some of what they said. As the feast continued, he noticed that Zara, Lyra's daughter, kept staring at him. She was unlike any woman Ethan had ever met. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost dangerous. Her violet skin was smooth, her hair long and silver, and her eyes were sharp, like a predator's. But there was something else, something soft behind her gaze. Something that made Ethan feel like she was studying him, trying to figure him out. It was then that Zara leaned forward, her voice low but clear. "Human," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "Do you have a mate yet?" Ethan blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "A mate?" he repeated, his voice cracking slightly. I don't understand." Zara smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was more like a challenge. "My mother bakes and kills well. Please take her as your wife." The table went silent. Ethan felt his heart race. Was this a joke? He glanced around the table, but the Veron seemed completely serious. Lyra, her mother, and the other warriors didn't laugh. They just waited for Ethan's response. The room felt like it had become much smaller, the air heavier. Ethan didn't know how to react. He wasn't sure if this was a cultural misunderstanding or if Zara was actually proposing marriage. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. He had just come here to make contact, not to get involved in some kind of alien marriage proposal. "Not looking for a mate right now," Ethan said awkwardly, his face turning red. I'm just here for the mission, really. Zara didn't seem offended by his answer. Instead, she seemed amused. A mate is important. It helps us grow stronger. Bond makes us unstoppable. You will understand once you know more of us. Ethan tried to shake off the feeling of being caught in some strange alien custom. He wasn't sure what kind of answer he had expected, but it wasn't this. His mission was to learn, to gather information, and to represent humanity. He wasn't ready for this kind of personal challenge. Later that night, after the feast had ended, Ethan sat alone outside, trying to clear his thoughts. The stars above shone brightly in the clear sky, and the breeze carried the scent of freshly baked bread and something ... sharper. He wasn't sure if he had misunderstood Zara's words or if she was truly serious. He had heard of alien cultures with strange customs, but nothing like this. Was this a test? Was Zara trying to see if he was worthy of joining their culture, their people, their strength? Or was she truly interested in him? Ethan didn't know. But as he sat there, deep in thought, he realized that his journey had just become far more complicated than he had ever imagined. The following days on the Varan planet were a whirlwind of strange customs, new challenges, and surprises that kept Ethan on edge. It was clear that the Varan weren't like any species he had encountered before. Their strength, both in battle and in their way of life, was evident in everything they did. Yet, despite their fierce appearance, there was something deeper beneath the surface, something more complex. Ethan found himself drawn into their world, eager to understand their culture, but uncertain of where he fit in. The first thing he learned is that the Varan were proud of their history and traditions. Their society was built on strength, but not just physical strength. It was also about mental and emotional strength, the ability to survive in a world that often seemed dangerous and unpredictable. The Varan's warriors were trained from a young age to fight, to defend, and to protect. But they were also taught to value wisdom, patience, and respect for their elders and families. It was a unique balance of power and peace. The warrior queen. Cerise had earned her place as the leader of the Varan because of her incredible skill in battle, but also because of her deep understanding of their culture. She was known as a fierce fighter, but also a nurturing mother and a talented baker. Yes, you heard that right, baking. The Varan had a strange but fascinating tradition. They created pastries and baked goods, not just for enjoyment, but as a form of weaponry. These creations were carefully crafted to look harmless, yet inside them were hidden blades, arrows, and other sharp instruments. To the Varan, this was a form of art. It's a blending of creation and destruction. Ethan was both fascinated and slightly disturbed by this tradition. He had seen many weapons in his life, but nothing like the deadly pastries that Cerise could create. She explained to him that the art of baking weapons was passed down through generations. It was a symbol of the Varan's ability to protect themselves and their loved ones, to make something beautiful that could also serve a deadly purpose. During his time with the Varan, Ethan began to understand how deeply ingrained their sense of family was. The Varan didn't just see themselves as individuals, but as part of something much larger. Family was everything to them. They fought for each other, they bled for each other, and they celebrated each other's victories as their own. But this bond wasn't just limited to blood relations. Anyone who proved themselves worthy was accepted into their family, no matter where they came from or what their past was. This was why Ethan had been invited to join them. He had shown potential, not only through his bravery, but through his willingness to understand their way of life. It wasn't long before Ethan found himself spending more time with Zara, the daughter of Cerise and Lyra. Zara was a warrior in training, as fierce as any Varan fighter, but she also had a certain softness to her that Ethan couldn't ignore. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. At first, he had been intimidated by her beauty and strength, but the more he learned about her, the more he saw that there was much more to her than just her skills in battle. One afternoon, as they sat in the shadow of a massive stone wall that surrounded the village, Zara turned to Ethan and spoke softly. "You're not like the others," she said. "I've seen humans in battle before, but they were always afraid. You're not afraid, Ethan. You're willing to learn, to understand. That's why we think you're different." Ethan looked at her, unsure of how to respond. "I'm just doing my job," he said quietly. "I'm here to make contact, to learn about your people. Never thought I'd end up in the middle of all this." Zara smiled, but it wasn't a smile of amusement.
Us.
It was a smile of understanding. Sometimes, life chooses a different path for us, whether we want it or not. As the days passed, Ethan's connection with Zara deepened. He began to see her not just as a warrior, but as someone who was struggling with her own expectations. She was under pressure to follow in her mother's footsteps, to become a leader, to be perfect. But the weight of that pressure seemed to be taking its toll on her, and Ethan couldn't help but feel for her. He knew what it was like to be expected to be someone you weren't, to live up to standards that seemed impossible to reach. The Varen didn't just value strength. They valued intelligence, creativity, and the ability to think outside the box. Ethan was beginning to see how he could fit into their world. He might not be a warrior, but he could offer them something they didn't have: human insight, human ingenuity. He could learn from them, and they could learn from him. One evening, after a long day of training with the Varen warriors, Ethan was invited to share a meal with Cerise. The firelight cast flickering shadows on the walls of the large hall, and the scent of freshly baked bread filled the air. Cerise, who had always seemed so intimidating, was now much more approachable. As they sat down to eat, she spoke of her hopes for her people. "The Varen have always been strong," Cyr said, "but strength is not enough. We must learn to adapt, to grow. The galaxy is changing, and we must change with it." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "It's not easy to change," he said. "But sometimes, change is the only way forward." Cerise smiled, her eyes softening. "I see why they chose you. You think like a Varen, Ethan. You see beyond the surface." As the evening wore on, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of belonging. He had always felt like an outsider, even among his own people. But here with the Varen, he felt like he was part of something greater. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since arriving on this strange planet, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Later that night, as he lay in his quarters, Ethan's mind wandered back to the strange proposal from Zara. She had asked him if he had a mate. It wasn't something he had ever thought about in this context. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but he couldn't deny the fact that Zara was constantly on his mind. Her strength, her beauty, her courage, it all seemed so overwhelming. And her mother, Cerise, was equally captivating. Ethan didn't know what to think, but he knew one thing for sure. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't have imagined. The days were becoming longer as Ethan spent more time with the Varen. Their world was unlike anything he had ever seen, and their ways were starting to sink in. While the warriors were skilled in combat, it was clear that their strength wasn't just physical. The Varen believed that true power came from within. Mental toughness, emotional resilience, and the ability to endure were just as important as battle skills. But despite the respect he had for their culture, Ethan was still unsure about his place in it. He had never been part of a warrior race, and he didn't know if he could fit into their world. He was just a human, someone who had spent most of his life on Earth, in a world that wasn't about fighting but surviving in other ways. Yet, in the days he had spent with the Varen, he had started to see the value of their strength. There was something admirable about their way of life, about their connection to each other. But still, he was an outsider, and the question lingered: could he prove himself worthy of being part of their world? It was late one afternoon when the challenge came. Ethan had been spending time with Zara, practicing some basic hand-to-hand combat moves. While he wasn't a trained fighter, the Varen had insisted that he try. Zara had been patient with him, teaching him how to block and strike with precision. But as they sparred, it became clear to Ethan that he was no match for her. She was fast, strong, and her every movement was a reminder of just how much training she had undergone. "You're getting better," Zara said, stepping back and wiping the sweat from her forehead. "But you're still holding back. You won't make it in this world if you keep holding back." Ethan paused, catching his breath. "I don't know if I'm made for this. I'm not a warrior. I'm just ... me." Zara's eyes softened for a moment. "You don't have to be like us, Ethan. You just have to be strong in your own way. We're not all the same. Our strength comes from our ability to adapt, to find our own path. That's what will make you valuable here. Her words stuck with him, but they weren't enough to quiet the doubts in his mind. Just then, Cerise, Zara's mother, appeared in the doorway of the training hall. Her eyes were sharp, and there was a serious expression on her face. Ethan had always admired Cerise, not only for her skill in battle, but also for her wisdom. But now, as she approached him, he could see something else in her eyes and expectation. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm but firm, "it's time. You prove your worth. If you truly want to be part of our world, you must show us that you understand our ways. We do not accept weakness in our ranks. You have the heart of a warrior, but you must show us that you have the strength to back it." Up! Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Was this a test? Cerise challenging him to prove himself? "What do you want me to do?" he asked, unsure of what to expect. Cerise didn't answer right away. She simply nodded to the side, where several Varen warriors were gathered watching him closely. The warriors stood in a tight formation, their eyes sharp and focused. Ethan had seen them in battle before, and he knew just how powerful they were. This was not just a physical test. This was about proving himself to an entire race. "We'll begin with a series of trials," Cerise said. "They will test your body, your mind, and your spirit. Only then will you truly understand the Varen way." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle over him. His mind raced. This was it. The moment he had been dreading, yet also hoping for. He had to prove himself, not just to Cerise and the Varen, but to himself. He had to show them that, despite being human, despite not being born into their warrior culture, he was capable of being one of them. The first trial was simple, a race through the forest. The Varen had set up a challenging course filled with obstacles, thick vines to climb, deep trenches to jump over, and uneven ground to navigate. Ethan took his first steps with a sense of dread, but as he moved through the course, something inside him clicked. He wasn't a warrior, but he had been trained for survival his whole life. He knew how to push his limits, how to keep going even when his body screamed for him to stop. By the time he crossed the finish line, he was covered in mud, his breath ragged, but his heart was pounding with a sense of accomplishment. Done it. He wasn't as fast as the Varen, but he had completed the course. The second trial was different. This time, Ethan was faced with a Pazula challenge of intellect. The Varen tested his ability to solve a series of complex problems that required strategic thinking and problem-solving. It wasn't about brute strength, it was about using his mind to find solutions. As he worked through the puzzle, Ethan realized something important. The Varen valued intelligence just as much as strength. They weren't just warriors, they were thinkers, planners. This was something he could offer, something he could excel at. By the time he solved the final puzzle, he felt a sense of pride. He hadn't expected to do so well, but he had done it. He had proven that he wasn't just a soldier in a foreign land, he was capable of contributing in ways that went beyond physical combat. The third trial was the hardest. It wasn't a test of strength or intellect, but of character. Cerise asked Ethan to face one of his deepest fears. She had brought him to a secluded part of the planet, where the darkness of the jungle was thick and unsettling. He had to spend the night there alone. The only rule was that he couldn't run from whatever challenges the night would bring. He had to stay in the dark, face his fears, and survive, as Ethan sat in the darkness. The sounds of the jungle filled his ears, creeping, noises, distant growls, and the rustling of leaves. Every part of him wanted to flee, to escape the terror he felt, but he stayed. He stayed because he knew that in order to earn the Varen's respect, he had to prove that he could face what others couldn't. By the time the sun rose, Ethan was exhausted, his mind racing with the images of the night. But he had done it. He had faced his fear and survived. He had proven that he could endure, just like the Varen. The trials were over. Cerise stood before him, watching him closely. She didn't smile, but her eyes were full of approval. "You have shown strength, Ethan, not just in your body, but in your heart and mind. You are ready to be part of our people." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. The trials had been grueling, but they had made him stronger. He had proven that he wasn't just a human outsider, he was a warrior. In his own right, as he looked around at the Varen, he knew that he had found a place where he truly belonged. The day after Ethan completed the trials, a strange sense of calm settled over the Varen village. It was as though the entire planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Ethan could feel it too. The air was thicker. The usual sounds of the jungle seemed quieter. And even the warriors appeared more alert than usual. Ethan had grown close to the Varen in the past few weeks. He spent his time training with Zara, learning more about their customs, and sharing his own experiences with them. He had become a part of their community, accepted not only for his bravery, but for his willingness to learn and adapt. The Varen had tested him, and he had passed. But now, a new challenge was coming, one that he wasn't prepared for. It was early in the morning when the first sign of danger appeared. The sky above the village grew dark, and the distant rumble of thunder echoed through the hills. Alavaron! Warriors immediately sprang into action, their faces hard with determination. Ethan was already on his feet, instinctively reaching for the weapons he had been trained to use. But Cerise, the warrior queen, stopped him. "Stay with me," she ordered, her voice commanding. "There is no need for you to fight yet. Let the warriors handle this." Ethan nodded, though he felt uneasy. He wanted to fight. He had proven himself in the trials, and now he wanted to show the Varen that he could protect them just as much as they had protected him. But Cerise was right. This was not his battle yet. The Varen were experts in defending their village, and as the sky darkened, their defenses were quickly put into place. The warriors positioned themselves along the walls and in strategic points around the village. The entire community seemed to move with precision, as if they had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times before. Zara joined Ethan as they watched. The warriors prepare. Her face was serious, her eyes scanning the horizon. She didn't speak at first, but Ethan could see the worry in her expression. "What's happening?" Ethan asked quietly, his hand instinctively reaching for his communicator. But there was no signal. The Varen had deliberately kept all communication devices turned off, knowing that any attempt to contact outsiders could lead to dangerous interference. "We've sensed them before," Zara replied, her voice low.
Oh.
"The enemies we've fought in the past, these are their allies. They come from a race called the Trog, a brutal group of conquerors. They've been trying to take over our planet for years, and now they've come back." Ethan's heart sank. The Trog were known across the galaxy for their vicious tactics and merciless attacks. They had destroyed entire civilizations in their quest for power. He had read about them in his briefings, but hearing it from Zara made the threat feel real. He watched as Cerise and the other warriors gathered in the center of the village. The air was tense, every movement measured and precise. There was no fear in their eyes, just a cold readiness for what was to come. "We'll fight together," Zara said, her voice steady. "The Varen are a family. We fight for each other. You'll see what we're capable of," she spoke. A loud roar echoed from the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of engines. The Trog were coming. They had arrived in their ships, massive war vessels that hovered just above the ground. Casting long shadows over the village, Ethan's pulse quickened as the first ship descended from the sky, its enormous shadow darkening the land. He had seen ships before, but nothing like this. The Trog ships were designed for intimidation, dark, jagged, and covered in spikes. They looked like machines of destruction, built with only one purpose: to conquer and destroy. The warriors didn't wait for the Trog to land. As soon as the ships touched down, they charged. The sound of the Varen battle cry filled the air, and Ethan felt the adrenaline rush through his veins. He had trained for this moment, but it was different now. This wasn't a test. This was real. And this time, he wasn't standing on the sidelines. Zara turned to him, her expression intense. "Stay close. If you're going to fight with us, you need to be ready." Ethan nodded, gripping his weapon tightly. He had never fought in a real battle before, but the training he had undergone with the Varen had prepared him more than he realized. His heart raced, but his mind was calm. He had learned to block out fear, to focus on what needed to be done, as the Trog forces spilled out of their ships. The Varen warriors charged forward, weapons drawn and ready. Ethan followed behind Zara, keeping close as they joined the fray. The Trogg were larger than humans, but their size didn't intimidate Ethan. He had seen warriors like Zara fight before, and now it was his turn to prove that he belonged alongside them. The battle was brutal. The Trogg fought with wild fury, but the Varen were a well-coordinated force. Every strike, every movement, was calculated and precise. Ethan watched as Zara cut through their enemies with deadly grace, her blade flashing in the light. Her speed was unmatched, and her strength was overwhelming. He followed her lead, doing his best to hold his ground. At first, Ethan felt out of place. He was slower than the Varen, and his movements weren't as fluid. But with every battle cry, every strike, he grew more confident. He was learning, adapting to the chaos of the battlefield. He was no longer just an observer, he was a fighter. But even with the Varen's strength and training, the Trogg were relentless. It kept coming, wave after wave, until it felt like the entire village was under siege. Ethan's arms ached, and his legs were beginning to feel heavy, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. As the sun began to set, the battle raged on. Ethan was surrounded by warriors, both Varen and Trogg, fighting for survival. It felt like hours had passed, but time seemed to blur. The only thing that mattered was the fight. And Ethan knew that, no matter what happened, he had to hold his ground then. Just as he was about to collapse from exhaustion, something shifted in the air. The Trogg's momentum slowed. The roar of their ships faded, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. Ethan turned to Zara, who was breathing heavily but still standing strong. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the battle. Zara's eyes narrowed. "Something's coming, something bigger." Ethan looked around, but the answer came too late. A new ship appeared on the horizon, much larger than the others, with dark tendrils of smoke trailing. Behind it, it was a massive warship, far more advanced than the Trogg's usual vessels. It was heading straight for the village. The battle raged for hours, the sounds of clashing metal and battle cries echoing across the village. Ethan was exhausted. His arms were sore, his body covered in cuts and bruises, but he refused to stop. He had come to this planet to learn, to prove himself, and now, in the middle of the chaos, he realized he wasn't just fighting for the Varen. He was fighting for his place among them. For his new family, Zara was fighting beside him, as fast and fierce as ever. She moved with precision, cutting down enemy after enemy without breaking a sweat. Ethan admired her strength, but he couldn't help but feel like a child compared to her. She was born to fight, trained for battle from a young age, while he had been thrown into this world with little more than basic training. But as the battle continued, something in Ethan shifted. His instincts kicked in. He wasn't just reacting anymore, he was anticipating. He started to move with purpose, his strikes becoming more controlled, more accurate. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, and for the first time since he had arrived, he truly felt like he belonged. The Trogg were relentless, but the Varen were just as determined. They fought with a passion that Ethan had never seen before. The warriors didn't just fight for survival. They fought for their people, for their family. And in that moment, Ethan understood what Zara had meant when she said, "We fight for each other." The Varen weren't just warriors, they were a united force, bound together by a common goal. Despite their strength, the Trogg kept coming. They were larger, stronger, and more brutal than any enemies Ethan had faced. But the Varen weren't backing down. The battle seemed to go on forever. And just when Ethan thought he couldn't continue, he saw Saristha, leader of the Varen, fighting at the front lines. Her presence was like a force of nature. Her blade moved with such speed and precision that it was impossible to keep track. She was a warrior and a queen, and she commanded respect from everyone around her. Ethan watched in awe as she cut through the Trogg like they were nothing more than shadows. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her people. Her family, and Ethan could feel her strength in every swing of her weapon. It was then that the ground shook. The rumbling was so strong it nearly knocked Ethan off his feet. He looked up to see a massive shadow blocking out the sun. It was a ship, but not like any ship he had ever seen. This one was huge, far larger than any of the Trog's vessels. It was black as night, its surface gleaming with sharp edges and jagged points. The Trog had brought reinforcements, and these reinforcements were unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. "Zara," Ethan shouted over the noise of the battle, his voice filled with urgency. "What is that?" Zara's face went pale as she looked up at the giant ship. "It's the Trog dreadnought," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We've heard of it, but we never thought they would use it against us." The dreadnought was the Trog's most feared weapon, a ship built for total destruction. It was armed with devastating weaponry and shields strong enough to withstand any attack. The Varen had never faced anything like it, and Ethan realized just how serious the situation had become. This wasn't just about defending their village anymore. It was about survival. The Varen were outnumbered, and now they were facing a threat they couldn't simply fight off. The dreadnought slowly descended from the sky, casting a long shadow over the village. Its engines roared, and the ground trembled. As it touched down with a force that sent debris flying in all directions, the warriors stopped fighting and looked up, fear flashing in their eyes. This was their worst nightmare. Cerise was the first to recover. She turned to the warriors, her voice steady, but filled with authority. "We cannot defeat this ship in the way we've been fighting. We need a new plan. Prepare yourselves." Ethan could see the uncertainty in their eyes, but there was something else, something fierce. The Varen were afraid, but they were not broken. They would fight until the very end. Zara grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him toward the edge of the village. "Come with me," she said. "We need to get to the underground chambers. It's the only safe place left." Ethan followed her without question, his mind racing. As they ran, he glanced back at the battle, watching the Varen warriors fight with everything they had. He saw Cerise lead the charge, cutting down Trog soldiers with ease. But even she seemed to know that this was not a battle they could win with brute strength alone. Once they reached the underground chambers, Zara turned to him. "You need to stay here," she said. "The dreadnought is too powerful. We can't let it get any closer to the heart of the village." Ethan didn't like the idea of staying behind, but he knew Zara was right. The village was in danger, and the Varen needed every warrior they had to face the dreadnought. He nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision. "What can I do?" "Help us by holding the line," Zara said. "We've trained you well, Ethan. You've earned your place here." Just then, the dreadnought's massive doors opened, and dozens of Trog soldiers poured out. They were armored in heavy suits, armed with weapons that could tear through anything in their path. The Varen didn't hesitate. They rushed forward to meet them, their battle cries filling the air. Ethan wanted to fight, but he also knew that he had to be smart. He watched as the Varen warriors formed ranks, their swords and shields ready for the oncoming onslaught. This was no longer just about physical strength. It was about strategy. The Varen had mastered the art of fighting together. The battle raged on, and Ethan stood in the safety of the underground chambers, watching as the Varen fought with everything they had. The Trog were strong, but the Varen were stronger in their unity. Ethan could only hope that, by the time the battle was over, the Varen would have the strength to survive the storm that was coming. The sounds of battle echoed through the village as the Trog dreadnought's massive form loomed over them. It was clear now that the Varen were fighting not just for survival, but for their very way of life. Ethan stood in the underground chambers, his eyes glued to the small viewing screen that showed the chaos unfolding above. He could hear the distant roars of the Trog warriors and the battle cries of the Varen. His heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't just stay here while they fought. He couldn't hide while the Varen faced their greatest threat. Zar's words from earlier echoed in his mind. "Help us by holding the line." He knew what he had to do. He wasn't just a human, visitor to their world anymore. He had become part of the Varen, a warrior fighting alongside them. They were to survive this. They needed every hand they could get. Ethan turned and headed for the stairs that led back to the surface. As he stepped into the light, the battle before him was like nothing he had ever imagined. The Trog dreadnought had unleashed a rain of fire upon the village, and the Varen were doing everything they could to hold their ground. Cerise, their queen, was at the front of the battle, her blade flashing as she cut through the Trog with unmatched skill, but even she looked weary, the weight of the battle taking its toll. Ethan sprinted forward, determined to do whatever he could to help. The moment his feet hit the battlefield, he was greeted by the chaos of war. Trog soldiers, towering over him in their heavy armor, charged forward, their weapons raised. Ethan ducked and dodged, doing his best to avoid their strikes. His training had prepared him for this moment, but he had never faced enemies like these. Before, Trog were strong, ruthless, and relentless. He blocked a swing from one of the Trog, the force of the blow rattling his arm, but he managed to stay on his feet. He thrust his weapon into the enemy's side, a move he had learned from. Zara and the Trog fell to the ground with a heavy thud. Ethan didn't pause. There was no time for hesitation. He moved from one enemy to the next, finding his rhythm as the adrenaline surged through his veins. Zara was fighting nearby, her movements a blur as she took down Trog after Trog with incredible speed. She glanced at Ethan, and for the first time she gave him a nod of approval. It wasn't much, but it was enough to push him forward. "We're holding them back," Zara shouted over the noise of the battle. "But we need to destroy the dreadnought. If we don't, they'll wipe us out." Ethan nodded, his mind already working through their options. The Varen had done all they could to keep the Trog at bay, but the dreadnought was still standing. It was slowly advancing toward the heart of the village. The villagers were fighting valiantly, but they couldn't win this battle alone. "Where's Cerise?" Ethan asked, his voice urgent. "She's with the warriors near the dreadnought's core," Zara replied. "But it's a suicide mission. They can't destroy it alone." Ethan's heart raced. He knew what they had to do. They needed to get to the dreadnought's core, where the ship's energy source was located. If they could destroy it, they could end the battle. But it wouldn't be easy. The Trog were guarding the core with everything they had. "I'm going," Ethan said, determination in his voice. "I'll help them. You stay here and protect the village." Zara looked at him, her expression a mix of concern and respect. "You're brave, Ethan, but this is not a mission for one person. We need to fight together." Ethan didn't hesitate. He knew that Zara was right. This was a battle that couldn't be won alone. He needed to get to Cerise, and with Zara's help, they could destroy the dreadnought together. "Follow me," Zara ordered, and without another word. She turned and charged toward the Trog forces guarding the dreadnought's core. The two of them fought side by side, cutting through the Trog ranks with a ferocity that matched the warriors of the Varon. Every step forward felt like a victory. But they were still outnumbered. The Trog fought with everything they had, and it was clear that this would be a battle of endurance as they reached the entrance to the core chamber. They were stopped by a wave of Trog soldiers. These Trogs were bigger, stronger, and more heavily armored than the others. Ethan and Zara fought back to back, their weapons clashing with the Trogs as they tried to push forward. The battle seemed endless, but they didn't stop. "Ethan, move," Zara shouted, knocking a Trog soldier aside. "We're almost there." With a final push, Ethan and Zara made it to the core chamber. Cerise and the remaining warriors were already there, preparing to place explosives on the ship's energy source. The core was a massive, glowing structure that pulsed with energy. Ethan could feel the heat radiating off of it, and he knew that the moment the explosives were set, the dreadnought would be destroyed. But the Trog weren't about to let them finish. A group of heavily armored Trog soldiers charged into the chamber, their weapons raised high. Cerise stepped forward, her blade flashing as she met them head-on. Ethan and Zara joined her, and together they fought off the Trog soldiers with everything they had. The seconds seemed to stretch on forever as they battled. But finally, Cerise gave the signal. The explosives were set. "Now." Cerise shouted Ethan, and Zara stepped back, allowing Cerise to activate the detonator. There was a loud boom, and the entire dreadnought shook. The massive ship let out a final, deafening roar as its core exploded in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave sent Ethan and the others sprawling to the ground. But the dreadnought was gone. The battle was over. As the dust settled, Ethan looked around at the destruction. The Trog had been defeated, their ship destroyed, and the Varen had won. But it had come at a great cost. Many warriors had fallen, including some of the bravest among them. Zara and Cerise approached Ethan, their faces grim but relieved. "You did it," Zara said, her voice filled with admiration. "You proved yourself, Ethan. You're one of us." Now, Ethan nodded, his heart heavy. We did it together. All of us. Cerise stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. The Varen will never forget your courage. You have earned your place among us. Ethan smiled, the weight of the battle still on his shoulders. But in that moment, he realized that he had found something more than just a fight. He had found a family, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly at home.